Imagine waking up in medieval England. The sun has gone down. Most people are getting ready for bed. Shopkeepers are closing their doors. Families are gathering around small fires. The streets are becoming quiet. And now it's time for you to go to work. Unfortunately, your job is not baking bread, making candles, or helping a blacksmith. Your job is cleaning out human waste. Welcome to the life of a medieval gong farmer. Now, before you start imagining a peaceful farmer tending crops in a field, the word gong had a very different meaning in medieval England. It was an old term for human waste. A gong farmer was not growing vegetables. He was removing the contents of cesspits and privies. In other words, he spent his nights dealing with what everyone else wanted to forget. As strange as this sounds today, gong farmers were incredibly important. Without them, medieval cities would have become even dirtier and more dangerous than they already were. And trust me, medieval cities did not need help becoming dirtier. Back then, there were no modern toilets. There were no underground sewer systems carrying waste away. Most homes had simple privies, which were small toilet structures built over deep pits. Every day those pits became a little fuller, and eventually, somebody had to empty them. That somebody was the gong farmer. The work was usually done at night. City officials often required it. The reason was simple. Nobody wanted to watch the process. It was unpleasant, messy, and smelled absolutely terrible. So while the rest of the city slept, gong farmers went to work. Picture a narrow medieval street lit only by moonlight and a few lanterns. A cart slowly rolls through the darkness. Workers carry shovels, buckets, ropes, and barrels. They stop outside a building and begin their long night. Their destination is a cesspit. A cesspit was exactly what it sounds like. It was a large hole underground where human waste collected over months or even years. And yes, it was every bit as unpleasant as you are imagining. The gong farmer would often climb down into the pit itself. Armed with a shovel and a strong stomach, he would scoop the waste into buckets. Those buckets were then hauled back up to the surface and loaded onto carts. It was dirty work. Actually, dirty might be the biggest understatement in this entire documentary. The smell alone would have been overwhelming. Yet the smell was not even the greatest danger. Many cesspits contained poisonous gases created by decomposition. Workers sometimes entered a pit only to be overcome by fumes. There are records of gong farmers becoming sick or even dying while doing their jobs. One mistake could be fatal. And remember, this was happening in darkness, often with very little safety equipment. Modern workers might complain if they forget their gloves. A medieval gong farmer was lucky if he had a sturdy ladder. Despite the awful conditions, gong farmers earned surprisingly good money. That might sound shocking at first, but think about it. If someone offered you two jobs in medieval England, one involving baking bread and the other involving climbing into a giant pit of human waste, you would probably choose the bakery. Most people felt the same way. Since few workers wanted the job, cities had to pay higher wages. Some gong farmers earned more than many skilled laborers. It was one of those rare situations where society collectively agreed, this job is horrible. Let's pay extra. Of course, higher wages did not automatically mean higher social status. Many people looked down on gong farmers. Their work was considered unpleasant and lowly. The smell of their profession often followed them long after their shift ended. Even after washing, traces of the odor could remain. And medieval bathing was not exactly famous for its effectiveness. As a result, gong farmers often lived somewhat apart from other members of society. People depended on them but did not necessarily want to spend much time around them. It created a strange situation. Everyone needed the gong farmer. Nobody wanted to be the gong farmer. Yet without them, cities would have faced serious health problems. Waste buildup could attract insects, contaminate water supplies, and create even worse living conditions. Medieval towns already struggled with disease. Removing waste was one of the few ways to reduce some of those risks. In a strange way, gong farmers were performing a public service. Not a glamorous public service. No statues were built in their honor. No songs celebrated their achievements. But their work mattered. Sometimes the collected waste was transported outside city walls and dumped in designated areas. In certain cases, it could even be used as fertilizer for fields. Nothing was wasted in the medieval world if it could serve a purpose. Even things most people would rather never think about. The life of a gong farmer required toughness, patience, and a very strong stomach. Night after night they entered pits that most people would avoid at all costs. They worked while others slept. They performed tasks nobody else wanted. And they helped keep crowded towns functioning. The next time you flush a toilet and move on with your day without giving it a second thought, consider how different life once was. Today, waste disappears with the push of a handle. In medieval England, it disappeared because a tired worker climbed into a pit in the middle of the night and removed it bucket by bucket. Not exactly the dream career most children imagine. Yet history is full of people whose jobs were strange, difficult, and often forgotten. The gong farmer may not have enjoyed fame or respect, but he played a role that every city depended on. As the medieval town settles into silence and the lantern light flickers against stone walls, our gong farmer finishes another long shift. His cart is full. His work is done. And somewhere nearby, hundreds of sleeping citizens remain completely unaware of the unpleasant task that made their morning possible. For one more night, the city stays clean enough to carry on. And for one more night, the gong farmer remains history's unlikely hero of sanitation. Now that we've left behind the foul-smelling world of the gong farmer, let's move to a profession that was less dirty, but perhaps even stranger. Imagine living in a small village hundreds of years ago. The roads are muddy. The houses are simple. Most people know every neighbor by name. Life is guided by traditions, local customs, and deep religious beliefs. In this world, death is never very far away. Disease, accidents, and harsh winters mean that people often face death much earlier than we expect today. Because of this, communities develop many rituals to help make sense of loss. Some of these traditions seem familiar. Others seem very unusual. And few are stranger than the job of the sin eater. The title alone sounds like something from a fantasy novel. But sin eaters were real people. Their job was based on an old belief that the sins of a dead person could be transferred away before burial. According to local traditions found in parts of England, Wales, and nearby regions, a family would hire a sin eater after a death. The sin eater would arrive at the home where the body rested. A simple meal would be prepared. Usually this included bread, and sometimes ale or other food. The food would be placed on or near the body of the deceased. The belief was that the bread absorbed the sins, mistakes, and wrongdoings of the dead person. Then came the important part. The sin eater would consume the food. By eating it, he symbolically accepted those sins onto himself. In return, the soul of the deceased could move into the afterlife free from its earthly burdens. At least, that was the hope. To modern ears, this sounds very unusual. After all, most jobs involve skills like building, teaching, farming, or trading. Very few job descriptions include the phrase, "eat a sandwich filled with spiritual guilt." Yet for some communities, this ritual felt meaningful. It offered comfort during a difficult time. Families wanted to believe their loved ones could rest peacefully. The sin eater became part of that process. Interestingly, the people who performed this role were often poor. Very poor. Many accepted the job because they needed money, food, or shelter. The payment was usually small. A few coins, a meal, perhaps some ale. It was not exactly a path to wealth and success. Nobody became a medieval millionaire through sin eating. But for those struggling to survive, even a small payment could matter. However, the role came with a serious downside. Many people feared sin eaters. Think about it. If a community truly believed that sins could be transferred from one person to another, then the sin eater was carrying around the accumulated sins of many dead villagers. That made him a rather unsettling figure. People needed him when someone died, but they did not always want him around afterward. As a result, sin eaters often lived on the edges of society. They were invited only when necessary. They were respected for their role but also avoided because of superstition. It created a lonely existence. Imagine attending funeral after funeral, helping grieving families, yet rarely being welcomed into ordinary social life. That was the strange position many sin-eaters found themselves in. Some stories describe them as quiet figures who traveled from village to village. Others suggest they lived in one community and were known by everyone. The truth is that historical records are limited. Many accounts come from local traditions rather than official documents. That makes it difficult to know exactly how common the practice was. But enough evidence exists to show that sin-eating was more than just a legend. It happened, and it continued for centuries in certain areas. One of the most interesting things about the job is how it reflects human fears. People have always worried about what happens after death. Different cultures developed different answers. Some built massive tombs. Some created elaborate funeral ceremonies. Some buried treasures with the dead. And some hired a person to eat bread that had supposedly absorbed a lifetime of sins. History is wonderfully strange sometimes. The sin-eater's work also reveals something about community life. Villages were tightly connected. People depended on one another. When someone died, the entire community often became involved. Neighbors helped prepare funerals. Families gathered together. Local traditions guided every step. The sin-eater was just one piece of a much larger system designed to provide comfort during grief. Over time, however, these customs began to disappear. Religious beliefs changed. Society became more modern. Education spread. Many church leaders discouraged the practice. Gradually, fewer families called upon sin-eaters. The profession slowly faded away. By the 19th century, it was already becoming rare. Eventually, it vanished completely. Today, no one places an advertisement saying, "Experienced sin-eater available for funerals. Reliable service. Bread provided." The job belongs entirely to history. Yet it remains fascinating because it reminds us how differently people once understood the world. For medieval villagers, unseen forces were often as real as visible ones. Sins, blessings, curses, and spirits were woven into everyday life. The sin-eater existed because people wanted reassurance. They wanted to believe that a loved one could leave this world with a clean slate. Whether the ritual truly removed sins was not the point. What mattered was the comfort it offered, and perhaps that is why the tradition survived for so long. As evening settles over our imaginary village, a family gathers around the body of a loved one. Candles flicker softly. Voices remain quiet. Outside, the wind moves through the trees. A lone figure arrives at the door. He is neither priest nor nobleman. He carries no great wealth. Yet for this moment he serves an important role. A piece of bread is placed before him. A simple ritual begins. The family watches. The sin-eater takes his meal. And in the minds of those gathered, a burden has been lifted. The dead may now rest more peacefully. The living may find a little comfort. And the lonely sin-eater quietly continues on his way, carrying one more village's worries into the darkness.